Good morning, afternoon, and evening as we have guests joining from all across the world and across Canada today. Welcome. My name is Kayla Isabelle, and I'm the CEO here at Startup Canada. To begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am on today is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation. I also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories of all Indigenous peoples. We encourage you to take a moment to acknowledge the land that you are on today. As you have seen, Startup Canada has been busy curating experiences for entrepreneurs both domestically and internationally to have their voices heard and connect directly with advocates in government that are actively championing the needs of entrepreneurs. Now, during Small Business Week, we are delighted to be hosting a series of virtual events, including today's session, a global snapshot, the Mastercard Index of Women Entrepreneurs. None of this would be possible without our key ecosystem partners, including our co-presenting partners, UPS and Intuit QuickBooks, national partners, Mastercard, BDC, and the Trade Commissioner Service, and community partners, Scotiabank, Google, and NACA. Thank you for supporting the efforts in championing the needs of Canada's entrepreneurs to government. The event that you are tuned into today is of particular interest to me, as we have been following the findings of the Mastercard Index of Women Entrepreneurs quite closely. As a result, we have actually launched innovative international projects to co-create better solutions for women entrepreneurs all across the globe. Today, you're going to be hearing from a lineup of international leaders. And to officially begin, I am proud to introduce a good friend of Startup Canada, Jennifer Sloan. Jen is Vice President, Public Policy at Mastercard Canada, who will officially get things started today with a virtual fireside chat with former Ambassador of Canada to France and Monaco, and now President and CEO of the BDC, Canada's Bank for Entrepreneurs, Isabelle Hudon. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Kayla. I'm delighted to be here today. Now in its fourth year, the Mastercard Index of Women Entrepreneurs highlights the vast socioeconomic contribution of women entrepreneurs across the world, as well as providing insight on the factors driving and inhibiting their advancement. Through a unique methodology, drawing on publicly available data from leading international organizations, such as the OECD and International Labor Organization, our index includes a global ranking on the advancement of women in business in pre-pandemic conditions across 58 economies, representing almost 80% of the female labor force. Well, while there has been a great deal of interest in this SHE session stemming from the pandemic, and rightly so, Mastercard's interest in female entrepreneurs predates the present crisis. There are two reasons for this. First, women's economic empowerment is a huge driver of economic growth. Our business grows when the broader economy grows, and there are billions of women who can contribute to economic growth if given the opportunity. Our technology helps provide that opportunity, giving an entrepreneur in any corner of the world access to billions of global consumers, which is incredibly empowering. Second, we focus on women entrepreneurs because it is the right thing to do. Mastercard has made a global commitment to financial inclusion, aiming to bring 1 billion people and 50 million micro and small businesses into the digital economy by 2025, with a direct focus on providing 25 million women entrepreneurs solutions to help them grow their business. We provide funding, mentorship, and the development of inclusive technologies. This is Mastercard's commitment, and it's why I'm excited today to be in conversation with a leader whose organization is equally engaged in supporting women entrepreneurs. Isabelle Hudon was appointed President and CEO of the BDC, the Bank for Canada's Entrepreneurs, in August of this year. She brings a deep business background and a clear vision for an inclusive economy to support growth for Canadian entrepreneurs. She is a fierce champion of diversity, gender equality, and the green economy, leading BDC's 2,500 person team. From 2017 to 2021, Isabelle was Canada's ambassador to France and Monaco, and as the personal representative of the Prime Minister of Canada for the Francophonie. Previously, she was president and CEO of Sun Life Financial Quebec and senior vice president of Sun Life Financial Canada. Isabelle has also held seats on several boards of directors. She's the co-founder of the A Effect. Isabelle's received a medal from the National Assembly of Quebec for her commitment to the cause of women's ambition, and the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for her contribution to culture. Now, here's a fun fact. Despite 4 years of access to the best croissants and cuisine France had to offer, her favorite foods remain vinegar chips and fried chicken. Isabelle, welcome.
Now the world knows.
Now the world knows. What that is a fun fact. Who would have thought? Who would have thought? Now, do you have a favorite, a favorite place to get your fried chicken in Montreal?
No, I don't. Any fried chicken is good for me, and everyone is surprised about this, but you're totally right. It's a fun and real fact.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, I'm absolutely thrilled to have this opportunity, Isabelle, to have this conversation with you. We go way back. Our paths has crossed before, but we haven't had the opportunity to chat much recently. So it's good to be reconnected. And congratulations on your appointment to the BDC. And speaking of the BDC, I mean, you were, a female ambassador in France, and now you're the first ever female CEO of the BDC. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us, what was it like to hold such a high profile position in France and now at the BDC, although it's, you haven't been there that long, and maybe just talk about some of the hurdles that you've encountered and perhaps how you got over those hurdles.
Well, Jennifer, I did not feel any hurdles. First of all, I remember when Prime Minister Trudeau called me in 2017 and said, "Isabelle, this is amazing. You'll be in Paris. You'll be representing Canada, and you'll be the first woman in the position." And I remember my answer and my reaction, and I said, "Well, Prime Minister, it's a real honor. It's a real privilege, but it's a little bit sad that Canada had to wait until 2017 to appoint a woman in Paris. It's not at all difficult. It's not a country where it's difficult for a woman or a man, but a woman to become a leader and to be seen as a leader and to hold positions such an ambassadorship role." And he said, "Well, that's true." But then I realized again, because as you probably remember, Jennifer, when I was CEO of the Montreal Board of Trade, I was then again the first woman holding a position. Then you have to accept, Jennifer, like you, that we need to say it loud, to celebrate, because we need to multiply ourselves, us being an expression of the possibility for other women and young girls, because we're pretty good, Jennifer, especially women, to replicate what we see. We have some, we're a little bit shy to go where it's not really been seen before or done before, because we're maybe too humble, too shy. I don't know, with a lack of confidence. So in Paris, I did not have any specific challenges related to the fact that I was a woman. And I don't feel it here neither at BDC. Maybe too soon to tell. But again, back in my country, where I would say, now that I'm not a diplomat anymore, I can tell you that Canada is slightly in advance of France on this topic. and I will clarify my words, Jennifer. I think that there's more women leaders like you and I ready to be visible and heard about the importance of being out there and taking high responsibilities.
Yeah, Isabel, I want to come back a little bit to perhaps the differences that you saw between Canada and France. But let me, if I just may draw, and you may be aware of this, in the Mastercard Index report, Canada was a third in 2019. But then we dropped to seventh. I'm just looking here, in 2020. And I'm just wondering if there's, any guidance that you could have or you have where we could, I don't want to say reclaim, third spot. I want to say, how do we get to the best? Remember John Manley, I remember he used to say, we Canadians were always okay with bronze, but we should be aiming to be gold medalists, right? So
well, you're right, and John Manley is still right, whereby we feel that number two is respectfully the right place for the good Canadian so that we don't steal anything out of anyone. But I'm in the camp, Jennifer, and that I don't have to tell you, but I'm sharing with everyone. You know how I like to win, and I know how I like to aim high and to get up there. And I do believe I share with you, Jennifer, that we should aim Canada not to get to position 3 but to position 1, because when there's a will we can make it. Now back to the 4 positions that we lost. No countries are perfect, and no country is perfect on this. But this shows that it's very fragile. Every gain that we make on that front, we should carefully cherish that gain and make sure that we protect the gain by doing always more, because you can lose in a second 10 years of efforts. And if Canada lost 4 positions on your index, or not yours personally, but on the Mastercard index, Jennifer, I have another data to share with you. The pandemic added 35 years to the corridor of gender equality that already had it 125 years. So when we add the 35, we're now at 160 years if we continue at this pace to reach gender equality. So pandemic had a real impact on everyone around the globe. But when we looked at the C-session, and when we look especially to women, the impact was double, tripled, and even more. And specifically for women entrepreneur, smaller businesses they lead, probably they had less access to capital and financing. And that's probably also because also they decided to stay home and take care of the family. Well, that is no excuse for the 4 positions that we lost, but it can explain a little bit why we dropped.
Yeah, I'm just 35 years the pandemic has taken us back and created this gap. I mean, that's just staggering.
It's scary.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So then, Isabelle, you had these 4 brilliant years in France, and you had, just a ton of interaction, right? Not only with the public sector, but with the private sector. And I know the work you did there was fabulous, and you were engaged with French businesswomen and everything. So France lags behind Canada. And so I'm just wondering, what are we doing well in Canada that you didn't see happening in France? And maybe it's a good reminder of the things that Canada is doing well that we should accentuate. Or maybe there was things happening in France that you see we aren't doing in Canada that we should be doing, and maybe you can impact that through your work at BDC.
I would say that first and foremost in Canada, what we have most special is the will and the leadership at the top. And not only in Ottawa at political level, but in big organizations and smaller organizations. I think, Jennifer, that like the Mastercard index and other index and other data that have come more and more public and known and credible that show that bringing everyone to the market and bringing and giving everyone the same opportunities and the same chance delivers value. And you know very well that in private sector you need to bring data to the table to get the conversation and to transform a conversation into actions. And I would say that in the last 15 years, because data became more and more accessible, available, and also that data is showing that when women are at the table, the country is doing better. And not only the economy, but the country is doing better. Then it was a call to action for many leaders and mainly men leaders. And when we started to act in favor of gender equality, then the results became true. The big difference with France is that there's probably a difference between, I would say, 15 to 20 years, Jennifer. We don't see and we don't hear as many women in leader position being visible and heard about this urgency to act and being out there showing different models, keeping the pressure on everyone makes a huge difference. And this conversation in France is not as loud and public as it is here in Canada, because sadly so, women are still afraid in France to disrupt the balance and the equilibre that is being managed by men, and they don't want to wear the tag that they are all about gender equality. It's almost that they're a little bit scared of the reaction or the disruption they will create. This is kind of sad, and often, Jennifer, they would come to me and say, well, could you come and speak to either our employees or our leaders or elected MPs or senators? They need to hear it. And I'm not at ease like you are to be as transparent and bold. This is a little bit sad, but this is reality.
Yeah. Isabelle, I love that, not only being visible, but the importance of being heard. And so do you feel that women are, I mean, I think we're visible. Are we being heard? Surely we're not being heard enough, but are we being heard more here than we would say in France?
I would say so. And I would say, Jennifer, that we've been heard but not seen enough. I'll explain. I think that our voice was heard, but there was not enough of us being visible in key roles, showing that it is possible. You see, like I'm pretty sure that um, young woman would go to you and Jennifer and ask for a piece of advice, like how did you make it there? Would you have any advice? They come to me. They come probably to Kayla and so many other colleagues and friends. But we need to be heard, but we need to be visible because again, we're good at replicating what we see, and it's difficult for us to be trailblazers too often. So I think that we have to play both being heard and being visible. And for Women and Entrepreneur, Canada and BDC, but I'll speak for BDC, we need to do better. We need to do better to bring the money where we can make a difference. We need to do better with a go to market approach that is not exactly the same that we use for men entrepreneur. we have to pick our narrative. We need to pick different kind of words. We're not responding to the same triggers that men would. So we need to be mindful and careful and highly ambitious. I don't know yet what kind of goal we will announce around underserved clientele and especially women clientele. I've been here just a little bit less than 3 months. All my colleagues are well aware that they need to prepare a highly aspirational goal, because I'm not going to go out there and announce anything else than being bold, not generous, but ambitious to get more women in business and to support way much more business-led company to scale, to grow, and to win.
Oh, it's so good to have you back. Yes. And look, you just talked about ambition. So can I, the A effect, I mean, right. You started the A effect. So you walk the walk and talk the talk. Can you share a little bit with us more about the A effect?
A little bit less than 10 years ago, Jennifer, after sitting on many special advisory board and hearing all the good things that we could do, I said to myself, I need to do an action a day in favor of gender equality. And not because that I've felt myself the glass ceiling or that barriers stopped me from anything, but I saw too many women around me and young girls, Jennifer, not feeling allowed to aim high and to think that it was possible for them. So I'm not one that feels or thinks that women are less ambitious than men, but I'm one that believes that we're just a little bit too shy to express our ambitions. So I've started the A effect. It's an experience over 100 days where we work with women to think about behaviors that they need to adapt, adopt, or drop. It's been 7 years. There's 5,000 women across Canada and now in Europe, Jennifer, that are going through the program, and it's amazing. And essentially, what we're doing is that we're working on trust and confidence, because what we lack most is confidence. It's not ambition.
You know, I went and looked at your website for the A effect, and I was like, dang, I missed the start, because I think your new cohort just started, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I missed it. I can't believe, Isabelle, time is up. This has just been a wonderful conversation. We could have kept you here for hours. You've got so much good guidance and you know, a world view, and you're such a champion of not only Canada, but more importantly of women. We wish you all the best at the BDC. I'm thrilled that we're reconnected. I hope we'll talk again soon. But on behalf of Startup Canada and Mastercard and all the community members of Startup Canada, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. Good luck at BDC.
Thank you, Jennifer and Kyla. You're doing an amazing work, and keep on putting pressure, Mastercard, with your index on countries to do better. I'll take the challenge for Canada.
Well, thank you, Isabelle. And in fact, we're going to do a deeper dive into the Mastercard index in the next panel. So I look forward to that. So thank you again.
Ciao.
As I mentioned at the start of my conversation with Isabelle, Mastercard's 2020 index was released last November, and thus includes the experience of the COVID pandemic from its earliest days. It examines how women in business are progressing globally, highlighting the socioeconomic factors propelling and inhibiting their success, and providing a performance ranking of the 58 economies measured. We have the top 5 performing economies with us today, and we're going to hear from them shortly. Before that, however, please allow me to highlight a few key findings in the 2020 index. First, And consistent with the notion of a she session, it found that women around the world have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic, with 80% of women business owners saying that they have been adversely affected for reasons that include their overrepresentation in sectors hardest hit, the pronounced digital gender gap in an increasing virtual world, and the mounting pressures of childcare responsibilities. Those findings make a compelling case for building on targeted gender-specific policy best practices internationally, and our panel should provide insight on that. Second, however, the 2020 report also offers an optimistic look for the future of women entrepreneurs, suggesting that the pandemic could provide a catalyst for exponential progress for women in business and an opportunity to course correct inherent gender bias. On the formal, for example, 42% of women business owners have shifted to a digital business model, and 34% have identified new business opportunities since the pandemic. On the latter, the next normal presents a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to remove existing barriers, driving greater gender participation and parity for women in business. And finally, our index provides a global ranking of the advancement of women in business in pre-pandemic conditions across 58 economies. Canada ranked 7th, trailing Israel, the United States, Switzerland, New Zealand, Poland, and the UK. We are delighted to have 5 of the 6 countries ahead of Canada in the rankings represented here today, and we invite them to share their secrets to success for women entrepreneurs so we can steal them and move Canada up to that #1 spot. During our conversation, I hope the experiences of our global peers will offer lessons in what the private and public sector can do to create the conditions necessary for entrepreneurial success, especially amongst women. And now let's welcome our panel. Ohand Kainar, Chargé d'Affaires, the Embassy of Israel. And here's a fun fact. Mr. Kainar is a mycelium enthusiast, a diehard Rick and Morty fan, and a so-so listener, according to his daughters. Karen Choi Fitke is Minister Counselor for Economic Affairs at the Embassy of the United States. And here's a fun fact. Karen has 40 first cousins. Next, let's welcome Ambassador Salome Meyer, Ambassador to Switzerland. Here's a fun fact. She failed the entry exam for drama school twice, but did perform on big stages as a member of a trip-hop band. And High Commissioner Martin Harvey, New Zealand's High Commissioner to Canada. And here's a fun fact about the High Commissioner. His best pandemic activity by far is helping to raise a guide dog named Keller for Canadian Guide Dogs for the Blind. And Ambassador Andrzej Krasniqi, the ambassador to Poland. And here's a fun fact about the ambassador. He's a sports and outdoor enthusiast. And during one of his trips, trying to master his balance on ice skills on a frozen Canadian lake, not far from shore, the ice broke and he fell into the freezing water, almost up to his knees. During his time in Canada, the ambassador has continued a regional custom of bathing oneself in a frozen lake. In Polish, I believe it's called bania. In English, we call it winter ice swimming. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists to Startup Gov. Panelists, again, we're just thrilled to have you here. I love those fun facts. You all have wonderful, distinguished biographies, and your experience in the diplomatic corps is incredible. But I think folks have gotten to know you a little quicker with those fun facts. So thank you for sharing them with me, and in turn, me sharing them with our audience today. I thought we could start this conversation by asking you each to respond to the same question. And I think what it's going to do is provide us with a sense of the entrepreneurial spirit and the startup ecosystem in your respective countries. So I'm wondering if you could share that with us. And, you know, I'm going to start with Ambassador Krusnecki, because in our index, Poland went up 11 spots. So they went up from 16th place to number 5 in our index. And so the ambassador, could you just speak to a little bit about your startup and entrepreneurial community in Poland?
Yes, of course, indeed. I'm not surprised that Poland saw make up almost to the top because I would say the transition system from the communist to the private sector, driven by profit, entrepreneurship skills, unleashed the Polish potential, in particular the women. So the Polish startup ecosystem is considered one of the strongest among the Central European countries. So we're the leader, but also we provide the guidance for the Central European countries like Ukraine, Romania, Baltic states. And it is developing and growing the first piece, making Poland an attractive place to start the business for women and for the young and well-educated generation. 3 important factors were different from the rest of the club today, because as I said, not long ago, Poland was the communist regime run by the Soviet style of management. 3 important factors that play decisive, including the Poland's success and the role of women in a social economic system. The economic benefits of diversification in Poland and Central Eastern Europe, and since transitions to the market economy about 3 decades ago, Central Eastern Europe enjoy what may call the golden age of growth not only in economics, but also transition in the labor force. The traditional woman role was the low-skill type of work, mainly in textile. The transition system, political, also bring the woman to the political power, and then completely shift the focus to the women issue and to the women role in politics, business. So politics, people be responsible to set the rules. And the rules was much more favorable for the women than in many cases they used to be under the communist regime. So we really face incredible challenges, but also create incredible opportunity for the young people and for the women in particular. So we increased the GDP for the last 15 years, almost 150%. So we're the top on the leader. And based on analysis that was done by one of the leading US university, the Poland GDP, if we improve the competitiveness based on the gender equality, we may enjoy up to 75 billion additional GDP to our economy. So that's an incredible stage in terms of the value. But also Poland as a country in Central Europe was attached to the Christianity. And the spiritual and social environment during the communist regime also create incredible framework for women to advance, particularly in the speech or encyclical by the John Paul II, when he raised the issue in 80s and 90s of the woman being exploited in a different part of the different continent by the system, economically unjust system that exploit women as almost like a slave. There was a very famous letter written to the woman in 1995 by the John Paul II letter, and he clearly stressed the church and he as a Pope will not agree to the exploitation of the women. And Poland raised in consciousness to the spiritual leader of John Paul II. And it was very important to create a space that whole society understand the role of woman, not only as a mother, but also as a businesswoman, as a leader. What also very important, the political environment completely changed from typical old Soviet style management system dominated by the women. You remember the Politburo Soviet every year on the October 17 or something, all of them men, no women. Okay, so the transition system and the Polish people perception of the Soviet-style system repressing the women completely changed the mentality. And a lot of leaders in solidarity movement came from the women, the idea. So that was a very important. And I would say also the growing rapidly venture capital and business-friendly banking system, particularly during the crisis, 2007, 2000 now a lot of banks was really gone under the water, under the red. In Poland, the banking system already survived. We've been ranking as a second in Europe after Norwegian. So the banking system was able, I used to work for the bank to be the part of the board of directors of the banking system. We also have a funds directly to support the women entrepreneurship in Poland. And I analyzed based on data given from different departments, the risk of doing business and support by the loan and venture capital for the women was much lower than for the men. Mm. So for the banking sector, we are profit driven, we're dividend driven. Lending the money during the crisis for the women entrepreneurship much more profit driven than for the men. So wow, that's sort of encourage the banking system to lend the money during the crisis. And a lot of businesses, even in COVID, still our banking system encouraged to lend the money to the businesses and particularly to the women, to the business run by the women. So that's sort of unique, I would say, qualification as well as characteristic of the Polish system. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, that is an interesting journey, and thank you for sharing that with us. Hi, Commissioner Harvey. I'm wondering if you could pick up on that and give us a little overview of the landscape in New Zealand.
I think what I would say about the ecosystem for women entrepreneurs in New Zealand, I guess our relative success, we've still got a long way to go, and I think I have to preface everything in saying that that. We're still working hard on this, but the factors that I would talk about would be education and the rising number of women who are going through tertiary education, and this is opening up obviously a much wider horizon for the achievement of women. Since the 1980s, generally, numbers of people going through tertiary education has expanded, and women numbers have been growing faster than men. And in that too, a focus on the inclusion issue. So ensuring that Māori women and Pacifica women, so people of New Zealand in New Zealand who are from whose family come from other Pacific countries. The second point I'd highlight is the networking in New Zealand. We are a small country, and we like to say we have 2 degrees of separation between anybody, and it's amazing how entrepreneurs feed off one another within a small society where it's very easy to make links across the country. And this has always been very important for New Zealanders, because we have to overcome a tyranny of distance. And working together through these networks, I think, is a key factor in our relative success. The third thing is the effort that New Zealand has put into organisations that are focused on helping women entrepreneurs in terms of mentoring, pairing women up with successful entrepreneurs. The provision of venture capital, access to capital has been generally in New Zealand a problem for the expansion of small and medium-sized enterprises. So we've tried to help fix that issue generally, but with a particular emphasis on creating some organisations which can help women overcome the barriers to success. Business accelerators as well, focused on women entrepreneurs. The digital landscape, we have a very vibrant digital landscape for entrepreneurs to work with. Recent governments have had a major focus on rolling out broadband across the country so that everybody can have access to the world by digital means. Obviously, through COVID-19, those firms that have been digitally enabled have been the most successful, and women entrepreneurs in New Zealand have shown they're capable of seeing the opportunities that that the digital environment can provide them. And last, I guess, you know, we do have some great role models. You know, the fact that we have had now succession of prime ministers who are women, governors general who are women, Supreme Court justices, and some very successful women entrepreneurs who have started successful New Zealand companies. So women have some really good role models to follow, and who are often very prepared to help up and coming entrepreneurs.
Yes, as they say, see what you can be, right? And there's so much there, High Commissioner, that I want to come back to, but we're going to continue our journey here. Another big mover in our index in 2020 was Switzerland. And so, Ambassador Mayer, just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the entrepreneurial community in Switzerland.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for having me on this panel today. Very important topic, I think. Some things have already been mentioned by the previous speakers, in particular education. But if we look at the Swiss startup entrepreneurial ecosystem, we have a lot of startups that are funded every year. So 47,000 annually for a population of 8 million. So that's pretty strong. But only 20% of those are actually founded by women. I think we will discuss the reasons for that, or potential reasons for that, later on. But I think what sets the Swiss ecosystem apart, or what makes it strong, is we have to rely on innovation. We're too small a country. We're about 3/4 the size of Nova Scotia, and about the size of a population of about Greater Toronto area. So fairly small, no natural resources. We have to be innovative to be competitive globally. And the second bit here is that innovation is not a government policy, that we don't have a top-down innovation strategy. Innovation is a bottom-up process. It's mainly carried by the universities. And we have some top universities in Switzerland and the industry, and they cooperate both in applied research as well as in actually supporting startups. So most startups are around, located around the big university, the top universities in Zurich and Lausanne. And the third one, and that links into what Martin said before, education. An important element of our education system is the dual track professional education. So only about 40% of middle school graduates go to university. 60% of these young people, they actually choose to learn a trade. So it's 4 years apprenticeship, but it's dual track education. So they are working in a company, they're actually paid for that while they're being trained for 4 years, and they go to school. And so after 4 years, when they get their certificate, they know their product or service, they know it really well. They know how to innovate on that and how companies work. It gives them an entrepreneurial edge, actually, at a very young age. And so turning patents into products is something that works very well in Switzerland. And so startups can actually be successful quite early on. And then fourth, and I think that's also been mentioned, it's the regulatory system. So starting a business in Switzerland is fairly easy. The legal procedures, the capital needed to start a company, the costs of starting a company are fairly low, and that feeds into, or that resonates a general attitude, cultural attitude of Switzerland that is very liberal in a European sense. So there's a very positive attitude towards entrepreneurism, and I think that also helps young men and women to start their company.
Yeah, Ambassador Mayor, I'm going to come back to that role of government. So stay tuned. But let's hear from our cousins to the south. What's going on in the United States, Minister Counselor?
Good morning. Bonjour, Jennifer. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I want to start off with a brief description of the role of small business in the U.S. economy. Much like here in Canada, small businesses are the backbone of our economy. And in the United States, we define small businesses as those firms that have fewer than 500 employees. And these small businesses make up over 99% of all firms in the United States, representing just under half of all private sector employment. And in fact, about 17% of these are small businesses with fewer than 20 employees. And in terms of women, women make up just under 50% of business workers and about 43% of all business owners. And I think what's most unique about the US entrepreneurial ecosystem is a competition culture that breeds success by embracing failure. Couple of ways we embrace failure is, for example, the US bankruptcy law, which allows individuals as well as firms who are unable to repay debt to either eliminate or reorganize their debt burdens. Also, you may know that failure as an entrepreneur is not only accepted, but regarded as critical experience, especially in the tech industry. It's even a prerequisite in terms of some venture capital firms that assess a startup's investor worthiness. And so having these laws and practices in place is critical in enabling an environment that breeds innovation, encourages risk-taking. And so again, just valuing failure is a key ingredient that has brought success to US entrepreneurs. And I think one other statistic that's worth noting is the World Economic Forum every year ranks about 140 countries in terms of competitiveness. And the United States scored particularly high in entrepreneurial culture and innovation capacity, ranking number 2 overall. And I think a lot of that has to do with what many panelists have already mentioned, education, but I also want to talk about digital infrastructure, something that the Mastercard report highlights. And so I think this all speak to labor productivity growth, how investment in digital infrastructure and education and the competition culture I talked about. And the United States continues to invest well above, I think, G7 and OECD averages in terms of ICT equipment, as well as R&D investment, which is well above 3% of GDP. So again, all of these combined make for impact, labor and capital investment, productivity, efficiency, and again, going back to the failure, embracing failure and valuing it in the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Yeah, and I can attest to that. Mastercard being a US-based multinational, what we say at Mastercard, if you're going to fail, fail fast, and it's okay to fail. So absolutely, that's resonating with me. And again, so much more I want to come back to, specifically that digital question. So we'll be back to you, Minister Counselor, shortly. But, you know, Chargé d'Affaires Kainer, I mean, you may be last, but you are number 1 in Mastercard's 2020 index. Israel is doing something right. Can you share with us what the entrepreneurial landscape looks like in your country?
Sure. I'll start out with saying, tapping into what Karen just said, that it's the risk factor, that the fear of failure is a major deterrent for entrepreneurship. And realistically, in Israel at least, out of 9 companies, only 1 will succeed. That means 8 will fail. But we can talk about this later. In regards to Israel, it's a story of innovation that has to do with disruption and relative size. And so I think everybody knows we're a very small country, around 9 million people, the size of New Jersey. So it's not a question of our size. We were also disconnected from global supply chain until recently. We had only 2 peace accords with our neighbors, and that is something we have to factor in. But talking about equity, for example, it's around $310 billion in equity in our stock exchange. So that's not a lot. But then when you talk about what is distributed in that, it's about 48% tech companies, and that is singular. We're not the largest investors in real terms in R&D because it's only around more or less $300 million per year that we put into R&D from the government with no equity. But that is 4.3% of our total GDP, and that is first in the world. We are also very lucky to have around 380 foreign R&D centers in Israel, and that means we also have a lot of venture capital coming in. $9 billion is the sum, and also 1.4 billion for Israeli venture capital. If I'm not mistaken, that is first per capita. We have 85 Israeli companies on NASDAQ right now. The last ones to be traded are Iron Source at 9 billion, and I don't remember, but the second company was also $3 billion, and that happened in 1 week. And that is due to, as I said earlier, our relative size is good for us, and also the disruption that we have is not a deterrent. And when I talk about disruption, I'm talking about the fact that we have a very complicated region that we're in. A lot of our innovation is driven by security requirements. And that, by the way, has another correlation to female entrepreneurship, which focuses on problem solving, which there's that correlation there. And that's, I think, why we're doing well in the Mastercard index. Anyway, thank you for the participation offered to us, and I'm sure I'll have more comments as we go along.
Yeah, thank you for that sharing. Thank you all for that sharing. I mean, I think you've all set us up to understand some of the things that are working well. And I was hearing some common themes. I was hearing education. I was hearing the fail and, fail fast might have been my editorial addition to that. So these are some of the things that are working, but it's also good at times to know what isn't working or what hasn't worked. That's a lesson learned. And I'm just wondering if we could pick up on that. I mean, Ambassador Mayer, you were talking about this bottom-up approach. Did Switzerland know that instinctively from the very, very beginning, or was this a trial and error thing?
Thank you. I think it's a structural thing in Switzerland. Our entire political system is one of bottom up. So, we have, through direct democracy, we have everything is from the bottom up. And then we're a federal state like Canada. So the provinces, the cantons have a lot of power for themselves. So actually having national strategies on anything is not something that is kind of inbuilt as a mechanism in our system. So the bottom up approach is kind of, we're born with that, I'd say, and it's very much within our political system. I think what we have, and I would call it a hurdle that Switzerland still needs to look at. So the government is here to create the good conditions, but I think what we sometimes forget is that entrepreneurs are also humans, right? And so they're passionate about their business, but they're also passionate about their families. So if you create the legal framework that empowers entrepreneurs, it's not just about access to capital or the ease of starting a business. It's also having access to affordable, available childcare, unemployment security, also for self-employed entrepreneurs. So there, actually, Switzerland, I think, comparatively to other European countries that we normally compare ourselves with, we're probably lagging behind a little bit. And that is something I think the government, that would have to be somewhat of a top-down approach at the end of the day. But for the startup, for the ecosystem itself, the bottom-up approach is something that's really just inbuilt.
Yeah, and that might be something else I'd like to pick up. You just mentioned access to capital. High Commissioner Harvey, you mentioned access to capital. Ambassador Kernikis, you mentioned the banking system. Ambassador Kernikis, could you just share, do entrepreneurs have access to capital in Poland? Is that one of your strengths in your country?
Yeah, definitely. We have a very vibrant competitive banking system. 50% of assets is controlled by international banking system or banks from Spain, Germany, United States. I don't know if Canada have some assets, investment funds, but also we have 50% of the assets, total assets controlled by the Polish banks. They're profit driven, they're dividends driven, but at the same time, we we think a long-term approach to the businesses, particularly to the women businesses. And during the crisis, we were able as a banking sector to lend the money. Our banking sector was not hit so badly in 2007, 2009 as the rest of the European banks or even United States. Canada was safe. But in Poland, we actually come up really nicely. So during the crisis and the COVID, our banking sector, controlled by the Polish capital, was able to lend the money to the business at a little bit higher risk, okay, including the business run by the women. But also what we find in our bank, that the women business or run by the women possess a lower risk to the lending policy of our bank, which was restricted, than the business run by the men. But in both, for the women and for the men, particularly the private business, we as a controlled by the Polish capital bank have a little bit different approach, a longer approach in terms of how to invest money. We cautiously, but it's still, we didn't turn our clients back and saying we have no money. Usually very profit-driven, competitive institutions tend to cut on lending policy. In case of Poland, the situation was really much better than the rest of the Western Europe. And vibrant venture capital increasing the asset size in Poland is really well managed. There is a lot of attention from the different investment funds from United States, including from Canada, ready to invest in our entrepreneurship sector, including the women business or business run by the women.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Well, let's just move a bit to talking about assistance. What role is government playing in your countries? I mean, you know, Canada's a federation, so we have our federal government and 10 subnationals, and you know, there are support systems in each of our provinces and from Ottawa. But I'd just be curious, what role is government playing in your particular country in the entrepreneurial ecosystem? Maybe we can start with you, Minister Counselor, in the United States.
Sure. I just want to emphasize, much like our ambassador from Switzerland noted, just how much the entrepreneurial ecosystem is a bottom up. And especially, you know, I want to talk about women entrepreneurs and what drives women. Women drive ourselves. And yet we have programs that facilitate women's success in the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so I just want to briefly mention some programs at the federal level. We also, of course, have the state and municipal level, and the importance of civil society and the types of support networks that we have. So in terms of the U.S. government, the Commerce Department has more than 100 U.S. export assistance centers across the country. These are one-stop shops that assess the export readiness of a country, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises, for doing business overseas. So they offer counseling, market identification, and introduction to other resources, such as the Small Business Administration, our Small Business Administration's export financing programs. There are a variety of them. My own agency, the U.S. Department of State, we have something called the We Americas Accelerator here in the hemisphere. And this provides women entrepreneurs with business consulting support, mentoring, and helps identify investment opportunities for their long-term success. And this is really integral, we feel, in the hemisphere for inclusive economic growth and to promote gender equality. We also have something I'm particularly very proud of, and these are what we call U.S. Small Business Development Centers. These are models that work throughout the region, and connecting these centers to one another to support and establish partnerships is really important. And what these small business development centers do is, whereas multinational corporations have boards that help guide their business decisions to grow, small and medium enterprises don't always have that. So these SBDCs serve that role in terms of providing board-like guidance in business expansion decision-making. So these are just some examples of programs at the federal level. At the state and municipal level, we have a state trade expansion program, and these are financial awards to state governments to help small businesses so that they can learn how to export and participate in trade missions that we organize. And also, most importantly, I think we have to talk about civil society networks. We have in the United States the Women in International Trade group, and this is for networking, mentorship, especially for those businesses interested in international trade. We also have the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. We have women's business centers, again, all geared towards sharing knowledge for success and networking to be supportive of each other. And again, our Small Business Administration has a big role in supporting some of these civil society networks.
Wow, that's incredible. And no doubt the entrepreneurial community is feeling well served by its government in the US. Israel, no doubt the Israeli government is well engaged. Could you share some of the things that are going on as far as government support in Israel?
So government support is a portion of what I want to say, but I want to also talk about equality for a moment. Women have identified, and research done for the Technion in 2019, the portion of home as being the most debilitating for them going out into the market and trying to create companies. Meaning that while they are away, because this is something that is not done in an 8-hour shift, this is something that is done 24 hours a day for usually around 2 years until a company matures. The family is there and somebody else needs to take care of it. And that is a portion about equality that needs to be assessed and how the state offers assistance. And so I have to say we're not doing enough. What we do give is free education from the age of 3 and up, but that means that there is a 2 to 3 year gap there in the beginning where young families, women with young families are in essence barred from participating unless they have a very supportive family structure that will assist them. That is first. The second is that thankfully high-tech salaries are very high in Israel. And so startups that are happening as a byproduct to a career, those are less complicated because then the price is more an emotional, psychological price of children growing up without seeing their parents, whether it's the mother or the father, because daycare can be afforded. So that is a good thing, but it's not government participation. The government participation focuses in on what's called the beginning of the funnel, which is making sure that the representation of women in organizations and the reception of opportunities are equal. And that I'm happy to say we are at a 50-50 rate in most of these government programs at the beginning of the funnel where startups are just creating themselves. Later on, of course, as I said earlier, that is, that changes drastically. There are other issues at play, also mentality issues and what women decide to focus on. And I'm quoting the Technion research where women were found to want to solve problems while men were looking into deep data, these are technologies that are more lucrative these days. So again, we should be doing much more on the psychological side, more on the equality side, but our approach is an approach of equality, meaning only the beginning of the funnel will be influenced by governments to include 50% women entrepreneurs.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Always more work to do, right? Look, I'm going to ask everyone to, if they could, to think about this question and share with us, because I mean, if COVID has shown us anything, it's that when faced with a global pandemic, women entrepreneurs demonstrate just an incredible resiliency to recover. And so no doubt you've heard of a woman or women in your country that have just kind of risen to the top and shown how to pivot and navigate during the pandemic. Could you share a story of an entrepreneur that comes to mind when with that backdrop? And High Commissioner Harvey, I'll go to you first in New Zealand.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jennifer. So the example I would share, it goes to my comments earlier about the digital economy and I guess the tremendous ability that women have shown recently, in particular through COVID, to take advantage of the digital possibilities. I mean, women, we think, I mean, they generally do better on digital platforms and in building communities. So last year, I mean, a really good example was a co-founder of an online marketplace in New Zealand called Choice, where a woman called Sarah Colcord launched a platform during lockdown and hasn't really looked back. This was a marketplace platform highlighting New Zealand made products, spotlighting small businesses across New Zealand. It started out as a side passion for her, but she turned it into a full-time job and created a viable business. And it's situated on a Facebook group. It has 550,000 followers now, and 80% of those followers are women. And it's also encouraged some similar enterprises started up by other women. I mean, that I think is a really good example of what being digitally enabled and recognizing those possibilities has enabled some women to do. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. Does a woman entrepreneur in Switzerland come to mind, Ambassador?
Thank you. Yeah, there are several, but can I just say, echo something that Ohad mentioned before about, you know, the problem of the funneling at the beginning and having equality between women and men. And that made me think, you know, in Switzerland, we have a lot of multinational companies that are located in Switzerland. Many of them are North American. And I do think that the North American approach to diversity and inclusion is inspirational to young female entrepreneurs, even if they don't work for that company. And I think the key here is seeing equality and diversity and inclusion as an advantage to the business. So having women in leadership roles, and of course, that also means recruiting women at the beginning of their career, is not seen as a target, but as a goal. And I think that's a very crucial distinction that the English language allows, and I think captures that. So I would very much echo that. For women entrepreneurs in Switzerland, yes, we have. I'd like to mention one that impresses me personally very much. It's a lady called Leah von Bidde, and she's very young. She's 31 years old and created her company, which is a medtech company working on women's health. And she's been very successful with it, but did have a little bit of a challenge during COVID because young families tended to put off the decision to have children during the crisis, and you know, considering all the insecurities. So in a recent interview I saw from her, she mentioned how the COVID crisis actually strengthened her entrepreneurial sharpness, the managerial sharpness as well, to get through that crisis. But what I find fascinating about her, about Leah, is that by the age of 22, she had already worked and lived and studied in 5 different countries. So she studied in Switzerland, then she went to France, then she went to China. She got a master's degree in China. From there, she moved to the US and to India. And in India, she created her first business. And that was at the age of 22, right? And so I think mobility is a key factor, and the exposure to different cultures, to different entrepreneurial cultures. And she says, particularly in the US and in India, seeing young women entrepreneurs being taken seriously with their business ideas was very, very empowering to her. And the other interesting thing is I find is that her product is a femtech product, so technology for women. And interestingly, this has been seen as a niche product. which is absurd. I mean, it's 50% of the world's population are your potential customers, right? But it tells you something, I think, about who dominates the narrative of success in business. And I think it's still a very male-dominated sort of culture that young women entrepreneurs are faced with. And so she, I don't know whether that's my interpretation, she chose femtech because she was passionate about the issue, but also because she knew something about it personally, of course. But I also wonder whether that we have to be careful not to be boxed in as women entrepreneurs into certain specific sort of products or type of products. And I think that's also something you might want to discuss later on. But yeah, Leah von Bidde would be the Swiss example. Very impressive lady.
What an incredible story. I love hearing these, but I don't know, in some ways it's depressing. I mean, she's 22. Makes me feel inadequate. But anyways, is there an Israeli woman entrepreneur that you can tell us about, Ohan?
Of course, and she's 49, so we should all a little bit better. Her name is Alice Miller. Alice Miller was, she was born in South Africa, and she immigrated to Israel. At 18 in Israel, you have to serve mandatory in the military, whether you're female or male. And she found, arriving at her service in 1994, that not everything was open to her. Some roles were closed off. Alice had dreamt to be a combat pilot. And despite the fact that we used to have combat pilots in 1951, for some reason we stopped that during the years and decided that some venues of operation are not relevant for women and shouldn't be involved and integrated into. She took the military to the Supreme Court, which is it's a very Jewish thing to do. And she won. And because of her actions, that venue became open. There are now, if I'm not mistaken, 34 graduates of the combat pilot training courses. Why do I mention this? Why is this entrepreneurship? It's because a lot of our entrepreneurship stems from the military. The perception of young people forged at 18 of their ability to handle machinery, which is worth multi-million dollars, to command others, that is something that leads them into their first steps in the entrepreneurship field. You know, that fear that they don't have anymore about what they can accomplish, what they can't accomplish. And she opened the route for women's integration. What's more important about her action, more than the flight course, is that she managed to get us to a place where 50% of the graduate of our elite unit called 8200. For people in the innovation field, they know what we're talking about. This is the elite unit that creates later on a lot of the cyber entrepreneurship in Israel. They are now dead even. It's 50-50 women and men, and that is because of her action, because of her lawsuit.
Wow, incredible. Again, goosebumps. Ambassador, I wonder if you could share a journey of a Polish women entrepreneur that you're aware of and proud of.
Yeah, it's a lot of, one of them used to be my student. She graduated 10 years ago from private university. We have a joint program in Master in Finance with one of the leading British university. And after graduate, she write the thesis under my supervision, worked for 4 or 5 years for Citibank, then for BNP Paribas in private banking. So I understand she met a lot of private clients from private businesses. That was her experience. And then she opened about 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the partnership with a lady from Ukrainian and Belarus, being as a permanent resident in Poland. And they hook up to one of the largest bank in Poland, owned by the Polish capital, by Polish pension funds, investment funds, and private entities. So she works right now with the portfolio of so-called risk type of assets lent by the bank. Bank thinks it's too much risk. So she hired her and her partners to do all this due diligence and then propose changes in the management structures, changes in the capital ratio, add a little bit with private sector money, increase, I would say, lending activity in banking. Generally, how to improve the balance sheets of these private entities, then run to the risk to be insolvent, and is a big problem for the banking sector. So usually when the bank run with the problems, private sector usually stop lending the money. In this case, when banks was willing to lend the money, but they need new, I would say, management on the top to improve the performance. And seems to me that the business is actually growing quite extensive. That's what I see and that's what I hear. Last time I was in Poland about 2 years ago, but I understand that she's still in business with his team, growing out to 15 people right now in the team. So the business is booming. But since there's the private partnership, there is no data, I would say, being provided to the public. But it's very successful women. She right now moved to help Ukrainian corporation in a process to raise the capital through the Polish Stock Exchange. So I understand she's quite happy with her success, and hopefully everything will be moved to the right direction. So I'm very proud to be a professor at Entrepreneurship for Women class elective about 10 years ago.
Yeah, you should be proud. That's a great story. And no doubt lots of inspiring stories and journeys in the US. Is there a story you can share about an American?
Absolutely. So last week, I participated in a women's entrepreneurship program organized by the U.S. Consulate in Vancouver. And this particular program was focused on women entrepreneurs in the tourism sector from Alaska, British Columbia, and Yukon. And Ambassador Meyer, we also had one of the panelists was a Swiss woman who moved to the Yukon to open a fabulous new hip hotel there. Anyway, among the many impressive panelists that I got to meet at this program, I want to highlight one in particular, and her name is Midgie Moore. She is the owner and CEO, but her CEO stands for Chief Eating Officer for Juneau Food Tours and Taste Alaska. She was one of our featured panelists, and the reason I want to share her story is because it is one of incredible entrepreneurial resilience. So Midgie got her start in the culinary industry as a food writer and blogger because of her love and passion for Alaska's rich food history. And her company opened in 2014. It was all based on tourism to host thousands of visitors to Alaska's capital city. But when the pandemic hit, her customer base dried up to zero. So Midgie had to think fast and think innovatively, and she emerged and launched what is now known as Taste Alaska in spring of 2020. It's a subscription box service to deliver shelf-stable Alaskan food gifts to boxes throughout the United States. So her new motto is, if you can't come to us, in parentheses, because of this darn pandemic, then we'll come to you. And she didn't stop there. I think she was really motivated by the success of Taste Alaska. So she sought another opportunity and started a business called globaltoursconnect.com. It's an online boutique marketing place for food, history, and cultural tours. So she really took her experience of converting Visit Alaska to Taste Alaska and share that with other women entrepreneurs through the online platform. And she serves now as a co-chair on the executive board for the World Food Travel Association. And she has a culinary travel professional certification from all this experience. And she's also head of the Downtown Juneau Business Association. I think, and she has so many other accolades, including, she's been on countless blogs and international and national television shows, including The Best of Zita and Gordon Ramsay Uncharted. I think you've heard of some of these things. And I love her story because it's the quintessential entrepreneurial risk-taking, innovation, resilience, adaptive and transformative nature of our entrepreneurs.
As the American Jennifer Lopez says on one of those reality shows that she hosts, I've got goosies. What a fabulous story. And who knew that you could find that path out of Alaska. So thank you for sharing. And, all of these stories are inspirational. But one of the things that Startup Canada does really well, impresses upon and nurtures is mentorship, right? And it goes back to what High Commissioner Harvey said kind of at the beginning, talked about these great women leaders in New Zealand and, seeing what you can be. And I'm just wondering if we can pick up on that theme of mentorship and just talk a little bit about it, what you see happening in your country, and maybe we can start in New Zealand. What does the mentoring, community look like within that entrepreneurial business industry in New Zealand, High Commissioner Harvey?
Yeah, it's quite broad. It's very grassroots driven. It's people coming together in networks. There is some, there's central local government support to some extent, but essentially it's driven by people themselves. And this mentorship, I guess, question is hugely important, we think, to the success of entrepreneurs. I mean, I'll give you some examples. There's a group called the Women Entrepreneurship Centre. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's based in Auckland, our major city. It's aimed at developing community leadership and entrepreneurial thinking. And they provide a wide range of activities, educational programs, research for new entrepreneurs, mentoring, consultancy, events for all ages to bring, and cultures to bring people together. They have meetings they call co-inspire meetings for sharing ideas. Bringing together, very young entrepreneurs in so-called youth boot camps, these can bring together hundreds of participants at a time. And then there are things like accelerators. An example is one called Lightning Lab. Which has seen some very successful women entrepreneurs come through. An example I might mention are two young women who started a company called Sharesies, which is a share trading platform. These platforms have proliferated globally in recent years. This is one of the most successful in New Zealand, and this has come out of one of these accelerator programs that we're finding all over New Zealand now. Thank you.
Yeah, and what about in Israel? I know you have these innovative clusters and things like that. Are young women entrepreneurs seeing those that may have gone before them and are able to mentor? And of course, women don't just mentor women in the entrepreneurial space or any kind of industry. There's, male mentorship and allyship as well. And I'm just wondering if there's anything you can share with us in that regard in Israel, Ohad.
Sure. So let's talk about the ages where female entrepreneurs require that assistance. Women entrepreneurs in Israel average at 25 to 28. That's when they start. There's a second wave at 35 to 38. That is after they created a family. So there are two types of mentorship that will be given. For the first cluster, there are initiatives such as SOSA, where young female entrepreneurs are drafted, chosen, handpicked, and given assistance in creating their business. And then there is a second portion, the second wave, where we're talking about women that have created families that are now, let's say, not young anymore. Children are still in the house, but they are self-sufficient. And the assistance given there is different. It's more an assistance of funding. It is more state-run and not the assistance, as we first mentioned, which is the private one. I want to touch about something else. The placement of women in VC is crucial Ambassador Meyer started on this point. She didn't go exactly to this, and I want to stress this point. If women are not placed in VCs, they don't see the entrepreneurs don't see a friendly face or somebody that can understand what they are talking about to the same level as when it is a male-run VC. The investment portfolio is proven to be different, so that is also a crucial point. For us, it's luckily easy because we have a plethora of VCs, but countries that have, let's say, 10 or 15 VCs that are investing, if the majority are male-oriented and there are male leaders in those VCs, then the potential for women entrepreneurs to receive that cash is also very limited. So that is also a point where government could become beneficial somehow. I am not sure how. And again, we are lucky to not have that problem, but I assume it is a problem for women entrepreneurs in other places as well.
Yeah. Ambassador Meyer, do you want to pick up on that point?
Well, thank you. Now, just very briefly, when it comes to mentoring, Switzerland is very similar, seems to me at least, as New Zealand, as Peter has outlined. But I think beyond mentoring, what I find extremely important, and Jennifer, you mentioned it, it's not just women mentoring women. It's not just, sort of gender-specific mentoring. It's also women mentoring men. I find that very important, and men mentoring women. So I had male mentors, and I've profited from them a lot. It's always a two-way road as well. And I think that is very important. It's not something that is structured, once again, sort of top down. It's the private initiatives mostly that drive mentorship. But I think what is more important than the mentorship is actually the networks. And I do believe that, again, there are organizations, privately run women networking organizations, but I think it's only through networks that you actually change, and that feeds into what Ohad just said, that through the networks that you actually change the attitudes and systems as a whole. A mentor alone will not be able to do it. You need an entire network.
Yeah. Minister Counselor, I see you shaking your head there. I assume that's in agreement. Are you seeing that and the importance of that in the United States?
Absolutely. Networking, mentoring, they're essential. I would dare say, however, that they're inefficient. And I also want to offer a third idea to incorporation with networking and mentoring, and that's the concept of sponsorship. While I'm not an entrepreneur, I was lucky to experience the difference between mentorship and sponsorship as a young diplomat. A former ambassador, a former assistant secretary of consular affairs, and executive secretary Maura Hardy, she sponsored me as a young diplomat this was for a position in the then deputy secretary Rich Armitage's office. And I tell this story because initially I was not regarded as experienced enough, qualified enough to even be considered for the job, never mind secure that job. But she expended her political capital and sponsored me in applying for this position. And what that allowed me to do is get my foot in the door and get an interview, after which then I secured the position. This is so important because this type of sponsorship allows women, especially in underrepresented fields, to get equal opportunity so that we can have equal experience, because there's often this vicious circle in the hiring process where because you don't have enough experience, you don't get hired, but you don't get hired, so you don't get enough experience. And so I really want to talk about the importance of not just networking and mentoring, which are critical, but also sponsorship, to literally have your skin in the game to make sure that another woman, another man, another underrepresented person has that equal opportunity and that to succeed as an entrepreneur, as a diplomat in any field.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. There are clearly three separate buckets, and I think everyone has to understand that. And, for the longest time, I thought I had this wonderful mentor at the Department of Foreign Affairs, as it was called then. It's, as we all know now, called GAC, the Global Affairs Canada. But at Foreign Affairs, it turns out when I look back on it, he was just a phenomenal sponsor. He spoke about me and promoted me within those decision-making, rooms, which is so important. And that's separate from someone who mentors you on your day-to-day and your career and so on. And of course, your network's just invaluable. So that's fantastic. Ambassador, did you want to pick up on that? Is there anything to add from a perspective in Poland?
Yes, mentoring definitely will help women to avoid the costly business mistakes and financial burden at the beginning. So the early introductions to the business mentoring will definitely help inspire young women to take the risks. There is always associated with the business, with entrepreneurship. And I remember this lecture about women entrepreneurship. I invited for 1 hour at least 5 or 6 successful women from the business to talk directly to my class. And then the program ran that after the class, they can set up 5 women students and can talk to this very successful lady for 1 hour, having coffee and cheesecake, or in Poland, very popular apple cake, and discuss the business. And usually also, I agree with the successful woman to take fuel for the summer break or for the winter break occasionally for sort of mentoring trainship for a few weeks. And that's introduced to the risk of being in the business. This is very important. In economies, the concept of entry cost. If we recognize what mistakes, what risk face particular business entities with different, very competitive war, then definitely will help not only mentally, but also financially to overcome these obstacles that we face doing business in a very, I would say, competitive war. So mentoring, helping, guiding is a key to avoid the costly mistakes. And in particular, as I say, entry cost of doing business in any field, if it's a sector, medical, if it's the business of consulting. So I'm inspired in Poland, in particular, not only by my successful student, but also by Madame Eris, who helped with some partners to create the cosmetic business in Poland, a very well-known brand, not only in Poland, but also in Central Europe, selling to different countries also under different name to the Western Europe, very successful. She opened this business in 80s under the communist rules and still was able to overcome the obstacles. So I asked them, what was the main business or what you learned for this experience for so many years? Try to avoid mistakes, costly mistakes at the beginning of the business. So recognize, learn, get experience from people who already been successful in the business. So if we want to learn women to be successful, learn from the successful woman in the business. If it's a consulting, venture capital, business, technology, high tech, or environmental, learn from someone who been successful in the business. That's the main, I would say, concept of mentoring, guiding, or coaching.
Yeah, great advice. And thank you for sharing. Sadly, our time is coming to a close, but I'd be remiss if we didn't touch upon kind of digital, right? We hear about all sorts of technological innovations, but unfortunately, there's still a digital divide. And as we meet here virtually, we need to address that. Ambassador Meyer, I think you brought it up almost in your opening remarks about the digital landscape in Switzerland. And I'm just wondering if you could pick up on that. Do you see a digital divide? And if so, what are the things that we need to do to close that gap?
Well, thank you. Yes, of course, there is a digital gap. There's a digital gap regionally, but there's also a gender digital gap. I've looked into a study. It was made in Germany, but I think it can be transferred to the situation in Switzerland. And that came to the conclusion, that was a pre-COVID study, that women have less access, less skills, and less openness to digitalization across demographics. So no matter how old you are, whatever background you have. And one of the reasons for this is it's very interesting, it's because women are less equipped with digital items at their workplace. So men more likely get the fanciest iPhone, the best equipment to actually learn these skills and be open to it, basically on the job. And so these are little things, and I think they're very important things, because you've mentioned at your during your introduction the phenomenon of the she session, right? We need to accelerate the access, the training, the skills, and we have that. I mean, Switzerland is a highly technological country, and yet we have these access issues even in Switzerland. So I think we really, as governments there, we need to address this, because I don't believe, or I don't expect this to really come from the private sector. You need to create the framework to have that kind of training across the genders and backgrounds.
We must see this in the United States, Minister Counselor. Is there anything that you can add about digital innovation, the digital divide, how we bridge that gap?
Sure. For a country that's renowned for our information and communication technology, some of the biggest names on the global platform, is headquartered in the US, and yet I wanted to share that 30 million Americans, that's almost 10% of that population, they live in places where there's no broadband infrastructure with minimally acceptable speeds. This is particularly true in the rural areas and on tribal lands, affecting those 30 million people. And another thing I want to note is, in addition to the rural-urban divide, income is also a major divide in that digital gap. So income disparities reinforce this, and there was one Pew Research survey that showed that 57% of Americans with household incomes less than $30,000 per year did not have access to computers or broadband internet connection, compared to 93% who have access to computers and broadband if making over $100,000. So I think the pandemic only reinforced the necessity for having access to broadband internet service, and the importance to all entrepreneurs, but particularly to women and to those living in rural areas and those in the lower income brackets. And this also applies to, I think, during the homeschooling phenomenon during the pandemic, also realized how this gap disadvantages that key important ingredient to entrepreneurship, to competitiveness, which is education. And this is why in the United States, you've been reading about various efforts by the Biden administration to overcome this gap. So part of our Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act has $65 billion to help fund to build this type of infrastructure necessary for every American to get high-speed internet. We also have something called the Digital Equity Act to create a more permanent program to help low-income households access the internet. So stay tuned to see how those all land.
Well, thank you. And panelists, this has been an incredible session. Learned so much. As I often say, why reinvent the wheel where you can learn from a best practice from someone else or another country? And so I really appreciate the stories that you shared with us today. And I know the audience appreciates it very much. I only wish we had about 2 more hours, because I got a ton more questions here that we didn't even get to. So perhaps we could commit to reconvening at a later date. But on behalf of Mastercard, congratulations for all 5 of you being in the top 5 of our 2020 index. Thank you to Startup Canada for this. It's just been a real great addition to Startup Gov. And now I'm going to turn the virtual stage back over to Natasha Morano, Director of Corporate and Government Affairs at Startup Canada. Natasha, over to you.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for that robust conversation. None of this would be possible without our key ecosystem partners, including co-presenting partners, UPS and Intuit QuickBooks, national partners, Mastercard, BDC, and the Trade Commission Service, community partners, Scotiabank, Google, and NACA, and our event partner, Magnet. Now, for those of you listening, I want to share some details regarding the Magnet Student Work Placement Program, which provides employers with wage subsidies to hire post-secondary students for paid work experiences. Through Outcome Campus Connect, employers can apply for the subsidies and connect with over 1 million student accounts from over 100 post-secondary schools right across Canada, all for free. You can visit swpp.magnet.today to learn more. And here to officially close out the session is a good friend of Startup Canada's, and that is Rodney Mcdonald, Head of Corporate Affairs, Canada, Mexico, Brazil at Intuit QuickBooks.
Hello, I'm Rodney Mcdonald, Head of Corporate Affairs at Intuit Canada. I want to thank Startup Canada for holding this important discussion today. Intuit is pleased to partner on this event. We all know that the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on women entrepreneurs. As we have heard, the private sector and governments alike have a critical role to play in ensuring women-led businesses can thrive through the recovery period and beyond. The evidence shows that digital adoption is critical to surviving the first 5 years in business. That's why Intuit is making key investments in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and other innovations designed to propel the growth of small and medium-sized businesses by helping save time, get paid faster, and make better financial decisions. A recent Intuit QuickBooks report on the future of our entrepreneurship found that female entrepreneurs are more likely than their male counterparts to pursue freedom and flexibility. Digital solutions can have a tangible impact as time savers for entrepreneurs. Our research has also shown that women entrepreneurs are shaping the future of small business. The Government of Canada has been a leader in supporting women's entrepreneurship programs, and for the first time has included gender considerations into trade agreements. But there is more work to be done. Thank you all for participating today, and thank you again to Startup Canada for hosting, and to the excellent panelists for sharing their perspectives on this important topic.